Yes, I can. Thanks, John. likely to fare well in the voting public focus on the level of enthusiastic support and opposition. And we have a couple slides where I think I'll be able to illustrate this more clearly if I can hold that question and come back to it. Fantastic. Okay, before we dive in any deeper to the data, a little bit of survey methodology. We surveyed 916 voters within the Weber School District boundaries. So the survey was in the field from April 21st to June 3rd of this year. Those interviews were conducted online, but respondents were contacted via email, postcards, and text message invitations. So we did our best to overcome any potential coverage errors in our voter registration email database by sending out address-based sample invitations and invitations that led voters to complete the survey online, but were received via text message on their cell phones as well. Our coverage is quite strong here. We're quite confident that this sample reflects the likely electorate this November, and the margin of error around all of the estimates for our sample as a whole are about 3.7 percentage points. We, in the course of the survey, conducted a little bit of a ballot experiment, which means that half of our registered voter sample saw each of two potential bond proposition conditions. That means that those sample sizes were smaller. And so the margin of error around those estimates is just shy of 5 percentage points. We'll go into that in more detail in those slides. And then we also have geocoded respondents into their respective high school cones throughout the district so that we can do some breakdowns geographically of support, opposition, and potential influence or persuadability of voters in each of these areas. We can move on. Okay, so some general perceptions and priorities. I'll breeze through this slide because it's a lot of text, but you will have a copy of this PDF to digest later. 2/3 of voters feel things in the county are headed in the right direction, which is quite positive overall. There are also strong positive affinities toward the school district. So 60% indicate they believe students receive an excellent or good education in the district. The issues that are most concerning for registered voters are teacher quality and teacher retention and class sizes. And there are also some lingering questions about the potential long-term effects of the pandemic on education. These are some of the themes that emerge in open-ended responses asking about what issues are facing the district right now. We find that buildings and facilities are not quite as top of mind for voters. Despite the growth, despite the overcrowded classrooms, that doesn't create an inherent connection in voters' mind to a need for more schools and facilities until we prompt that connection. But we do find that a majority of voters agree that the district needs to expand and rebuild schools to meet the demands of growth. Go to the next slide. So as I mentioned, 67% of voters feel that the county is currently headed in the right direction. That positive sentiment is more common among men than women, but we have pretty positive overall feelings toward the area, which is not true along all of the Wasatch Front. So that's good to know that the environment is not hostile. Go ahead to the next slide. Voters' assessment of educational quality in the district is quite positive as well. 11% feel that students receive an excellent education. 46% say that the students in the district receive a good quality education. 57% total saying that that educational quality is above average or excellent or good. Very few voters feel that the district is providing a poor or terrible quality education for students in the district. Next slide. This word cloud represents some of those open-ended responses we had in regards to what the most common issues or the most pressing issue facing the district is right now. The size that the word appears in that cloud represents the frequency with which it was mentioned. We pulled out a few comments that were particularly illustrative of the themes that we saw really parsing through all of these verbatim responses. So overcrowding, not enough teachers for the students, the area is just growing too fast. Teacher shortages, whether that's as a result of a lack of decent pay, the pandemic, or a mix of both. And then the last one here, getting kids back to in-person school and bringing students up to speed on issues from homeschooling during COVID. So again, there are some lingering concerns about what the effects of the pandemic will be long term. Next slide. We asked voters whether they agreed or disagreed with each of these statements. So first, the Weber School District needs more funds to expand and rebuild its schools to meet both current and future needs. We find that 56% of voters agree with that sentiment this year. That's compared to 52% in 2017. We asked the same question 4 years ago, and that represents a statistically significant difference, just barely. We are right on the cusp there, but that is a statistically significant increase in agreement with that sentiment, that the growth really means the district needs additional funding. And then the second one here, I have confidence in Weber School District to manage tax dollars responsibly. As I mentioned, we have 41% of voters who agree with that sentiment, and that is up just slightly from 2017, where we had 39% who agreed with the sentiment. That is not a statistically significant change. We're looking at a pretty similar picture here overall. Next slide, thank you. So looking specifically at our bond scenarios, our initial baseline for the $239 million bond scenario that results in no tax increase is the 60% who would vote for the bond. Again, no additional information, that's just the ballot language alone elicits a 60% for vote from our likely voter sample. The $287 million bond, which results in about a $30 per year tax increase for the average household, ended up with about a 48% forward vote based just on the ballot language alone. I will note that the focus group results suggest that, and the survey as well, the survey reinforces that after voters see the full picture, after they've heard the rationale for a $287 million bond, they understand the projects involved, etc., that support goes up. It is likely that voters would be convinced if we had the opportunity to sit down with every voter and make the case for a bond that results in a tax increase. But that level of information and education represents no small feat when we're in a ballot scenario. And no matter how hard we try, there will still be some cohort of voters that the first they hear of a bond election is the ballot language when they receive their ballot in the mail. So that's just a word of caution, but overall we have a really fertile environment, I think, for addressing needs in the district, excuse me. Yes, Robert.
So just to clarify, it really hinged on whether there's a tax rate increase. The size of the bond wasn't a deal.
No, and this is consistent with research we've done in other districts as well. It is rare that the total amount of the bond elicits enough of an effect from voters or enough of a reaction from voters to decide the vote. That household impact number is the number that matters. What is it going to cost me, not what is it going to cost the district as a whole? Okay.
Because the reason I ask is because since you have been given your charge and did your data, we have up-to-date assessed value.
I've heard.
They've gone very high, and our capacity is now bigger.
Right.
But of course, the schools the costs keep going up.
Construction costs also just keep getting bigger.
Doesn't necessarily mean that we're going to be able to build it. But I just wanted to solidify that it's the rating, it's a tax rate increase, not necessarily the size.
Yep, I would say that is absolutely correct based on our research here and prior research as well.
Okay.
We can go to the next slide. So initially, less than a third of voters say that they heard something about a potential bond in the school district prior to this survey. The things that voters had heard were primarily focused on the need for a new high school, new school buildings in general, and some of the specific upgrades that are under consideration. Next slide. So this is just a quick visualization about the ballot simulation experiment we conducted. So each respondent in our likely voter sample was assigned to see one of the two ballot options so that we're simulating as closely as possible the actual voting experience. We're not going to ask voters whether they prefer scenario A or scenario B because we can't do that in November. But what we can do is randomly assign them to one of two conditions and ask them whether they would support or oppose or vote for or against the scenario that they are presented with. So that's what we've done here. Next slide. This is just a quick mock-up of that ballot language. We have the $239 million bond that results in a $0 tax increase for the primary residence or business property, a net zero increase from current tax levels, or the $287 million bond scenario that results in about a $30 increase for the average household and a $55 increase for a business property. That is precisely what voters would see on the ballot, so that's what we presented in the survey. Next slide. I have talked about these numbers a few times already, but I think it's worth speaking to directly. Our initial support baseline for that $239 million bond is 60% total support. And our initial baseline for that $287 million bond that results in a tax increase is 48% total support. So, Board Member Ritchie, to speak directly to your question, I want to draw your attention to the polar ends of the spectrum here, where we have the definitely vote for and the definitely vote against. Where we see that definitely vote against category having parity with the definitely vote for category in the scenario that results in no tax increase. That's a really strong indicator that we're not going to have an opposition that overwhelms our enthusiastic supporters. So even if an opposition group were to mobilize, even if we had someone come out against the bond and sort of fight against it, they're not outnumbering from the onset our strong enthusiastic supporters. For the bond scenario that does result in a tax increase, we nearly double the enthusiastic support with our strong opposition. And that is a scenario that gives me great pause. So that level of divisiveness or sort of potential opposition right from the get-go. And again, we persuade some of these people, we assuage some of them, but starting out with more strong opponents than strong supporters is something that I would advise to proceed with caution at best. Next slide. So this is a breakdown of some of the demographic patterns in support for the $239 million bond. You can see that nearly 3/4 of women voters in the district start out in support of the bond that results in no tax increase, and a majority of male voters in the district start out in support. For those who have students in the district, we have 2/3 who start out in support of a bond. And again, even among those who don't have children in the district, we start out with majority support. These are really positive high water marks, having not presented voters with any additional information other than the ballot language. We also have pretty consistent patterns across high school cones, although Bonneville High School is our most supportive area, followed by Fremont High School pretty closely there. And age groups, I think we have some interesting but fairly predictable patterns. Young voters are the most divided and not quite strongly decided here. That is a small sample size. But our voters that are likely to have or be in age groups that have children either currently in school or sometime in the future entering the school system, those voters are the most supportive here. And our older voters are the most strongly against a potential bond.
Sorry to keep asking questions, but it's intriguing to me that Bonneville is so high, because you'd think if you saw growth all around you, new subdivisions, new townhouses and stuff like that, you'd say, oh man, we need schools. But they don't see that in the Bonneville cone, yet they're still supportive. Why is that?
That is a great question, and I talked to the superintendent about this as well. It's interesting from our perspective because it seems that Bonneville High School has the least to immediately gain from a potential bond. And the growth isn't quite as explosive in that area. I think what we're seeing here is just a more established set of voters, a little bit more supportive of the district generally, and many of them have either children or grandchildren somewhere in the district. We can go to the next slide. So this one is the $287 million bond coalitions of support and opposition. We do dip below majority support among male voters in the district, with 49% total in support from the onset. We're still above majority support with women. 57% start out in support of a bond. 56% of voters start out in support of a bond if they have students enrolled in the district. Again, we fall below that majority support threshold if they don't have students in the district. 18 to 24-year-old voters, again, this is just a handful of voters in our sample, but all of them start out strongly opposed to a bond. And our support across age groups dwindles as well, but especially once we get to 45 and older, we have a pretty significant strong opposition contingency in all of those age groups. And across the high school cones, pretty consistent, strong opposition levels, quite high, but again, Bonneville High School is our most supportive overall. They also have the largest constituency that would be strongly against a bond that resulted in a tax increase, though. So really interesting lines being drawn here. Next slide, thank you. Based on voters' personal recall of their own voting behavior in the 2017 election, we expect that voters' voting patterns or behaviors this year would largely mirror those in 2017. So we have a really strong 83% of those who voted yes for the 2017 bond who say that they would vote yes for the $239 million bond, and a full 80% of those who voted yes for the 2017 bond say that they would vote yes on a bond even if there were a tax increase as a result. For those who voted against the bond in 2017, we're not winning very many of them over this time around either. A majority would definitely vote against a bond. And again, this is before presenting any of our messaging or rationale for a bond. So, next slide, thank you. We asked voters in their own words why they would vote for or against a potential bond in the district. The things that really pop out here are just the growth in the region resulting in need for the schools. Voters recognize the demands that the district is under as a result of the growth in the region. And again, those messages or those responses that illustrate why voters would vote against a bond really hinge on just the overall tax burden, not wanting more property taxes, and a desire to see the district find other ways to more efficiently allocate taxpayer funds. Next slide. So getting into some of the things that I think are the most fun, we presented voters with the rationale or several pieces of information about the bond scenarios. So they have some details, some specific information about the bonds and some of the reasons why voters might support a bond or why someone might advocate for a bond in the district. After that sort of series of message testing, we find that the support for the $239 million bond proposal increases by 7 percentage points from 60% to 67% of voters who would vote in favor of that bond. The support for the $287 million bond proposal with the tax increase increases by 14 percentage points to a total of 62% of voters who would vote in favor. Again, this is a rose-colored glasses view if there were no opposition and they saw only positive information about the bond. But there is some evidence to suggest that the district has a compelling case to make for the need for a bond and how those funds could be allocated. The messages that were the most compelling, the things that resonated most with voters, were messages that emphasized the needs that the district is facing based on the growth in the region and how the bonds will be spent, and the advantages of addressing those needs now and planning for the future. So focusing on why now and why, well, it might seem like with construction costs rising, this is not a good time to bond. We really do have several advantages that we can capitalize on by bonding now and planning ahead. And then just a look at our audiences at the end of the survey, we find that 15% of our likely voters are unmovable supporters. They start out in our camp and they end in our camp. They're enthusiastic, willing to support a bond. 49% are to some degree persuadable on the issue. So that's a really strong coalition of voters that are ready to hear more information. And then 36% are opponents at the end of the survey. Next. So this is a quick overview where we've encapsulated just a few things about the messages that we tested. I'm happy to make sure that the survey top line is distributed after this presentation so that you can see the text of those messages in full. But the themes here that were the most compelling or that resonated the most with our likely voters were that now is an opportune time to bond because we have an opportunity to take advantage of very low interest rates, and because of the district's tax situation, we can bond now without raising taxes going forward. Rapid growth in the region, just the needs that are being placed on the district because of the explosive growth. How long it's been since the district built a high school is also a pretty compelling argument. 62% of voters said that they were more likely to support a bond after hearing that it has been nearly 30 years since the district built a high school, and even though it's a big expense, it's important that we do it now. And then the last message here that gets above 63%, the specific message focuses on how bond funds will be used. So the projects that could potentially be funded by a bond in 2021, including a new high school, the rebuild of an elementary school, a new elementary school, and a new middle school. And then the messages that still elicited a pretty positive reaction, but we start to see a little bit more negativity creep up, a little bit less compelling or a little bit less resonance with voters are these bottom four. So the message that focuses on the legal restrictions around bond funds, that bond funds can only be spent on capital expenditures, that's not something that is a glamorous message. It may not necessarily be persuasive, but it is assuaging to our strongest skeptics. The third to last one, providing schooling and making sure that the district has the capacity to address the needs that will come with new housing developments. That one didn't fare quite as well, but again, still majority positive reactions to that message. The messages about how the district has been entrusted with taxpayer dollars and how the district has responded to needs in the district in the past, those had the strongest negative reactions. And largely that's because voters don't like being told what you've done for them. They want to know what you're going to do next. So this is a really common theme that we see in districts throughout the state as well. Next slide, thank you. So I wanted to break this down a little bit because we did have messages that were more or less effective with different audiences. So the messages that focus on the rapid growth in the region, the need for the new schools or updates, are less effective among our oldest group of residents, ages 85 and up. Those messages are most effective among younger audiences, while those older voters respond better to the idea that now is an opportune time to bond. We can take advantage of low interest rates and really leverage the position that the district is in. And the other message that is compelling for those voters over age 65 is that bond funds are legally reserved for capital expenditures. As you may remember from our coalitions of support slides, those voters ages 65 and older tend to be some of our strongest opponents or largest constituencies of opponents. So those are some of our most assuaging messages, excuse me. Residents that live in the Bonneville High School cone are more likely than residents from other cones to say that the messages about the bond legally funding project construction or capital expenditures, or that the district has been a wise steward and has been responsive to needs, they react more positively to those messages. And I think, again, we're looking at a slightly more established area of the district. It's nice for those voters to be reassured that the district has practiced conservative principles and is sort of legally required when bonding to practice conservative principles with these funds. Those residents in the Roy High School cone are the least likely to respond well to these messages. The messages that work best for those residents are those that focus on adapting to and addressing growth in the region. Residents with children in the district are more likely to respond positively to everything we say because they are currently seeing and feeling and experiencing all of these things. So I think all of the information in the survey comes as no surprise to those voters. But those messages that focus on now being an opportune time to bond, the rapid growth in the region, and just the need for new schools, and especially a new high school, really resonate. And then again, across the board, women respond better than men to all of our messages. We find that female voters are more persuasive than male voters on the issue. And the message that resonates the best with men is that now, again, is an opportune time to bond. We need to take advantage of the opportunities that we have now that are a bit unique given the financial circumstances. We asked voters to just recall what the most memorable piece of information was from the survey, and we pulled out some of the good and the bad themes here. So one of the positive pieces of information that voters latched onto was that tax dollars haven't been raised in the past 20 years and potentially wouldn't be raised with this bond. And they also added that more schools are definitely needed. Another sentiment here, the district is cognizant of the need for more school buildings to accommodate the influx of students. So just the sense that the district is aware and making plans to address the needs in the county. And then we have some sort of middling or more negative sentiments as well. So if you need to add schools because the community is growing, then the added homes that will start paying taxes should cover those expenses. So the sense that growth should fund itself is something that we come up against a lot, and we don't necessarily have a direct way to combat that. Getting into the nitty-gritty financial technical details isn't something that puts stars in people's eyes and wins them over, unfortunately. So that's another sentiment that we see in some of that solid, unmovable opposition. And then the last sentiment here, I think it's important to note that anytime you're talking about a bond, you're gonna run up against misperceptions as well. So the idea that the district has existing buildings that are not currently being used, why not modify those buildings and do something about the vacant buildings that we're seeing as a result of the pandemic? I am not aware of any vacant buildings in the Weber School District. So again, this is something that I just want to emphasize. Not all voters are going to be well educated about how the district is currently using its resources. Go ahead. I assume they were talking about school buildings here because we're focusing on district resources, but maybe they're talking about vacant buildings generally?
You know, you probably have people who've been watching the news and seeing that across the country, there are many students who have not gone to school all year. And so maybe drawing some assumptions, as Kyrene said, just not with children or grandchildren not in schools, maybe assuming that that's what's going on here as well, so that, hey, you've got all these schools that are vacant right now, use them. So
that is possible.
The IRS, bottom line, if we've got some vacant buildings in our district not being used, Scott Zelmer's hiding them from me.
Yeah, voters respond really well to those as well, as we know. Next slide. Thank you. So this is a look at how our support shifts after we've gone through the rationale for a bond. We see that the strong support for a bond that results in no tax increase increases by 11 percentage points, and our total support increases by 7 percentage points compared to that initial baseline. So we end up with 2/3 of voters who say that they would support the $239 million bond scenario. For that $287 million bond scenario with the approximately $30 per year tax increase, again, our strong support doubles. We gain 13 percentage points of strong supporters after presenting the rationale and explaining what projects would be funded by a bond, and our total support increases by 14 percentage points compared to that initial baseline. Again, we have a pretty strong coalition of potential antagonists. 19% of voters saying that they would definitely vote against that bond is not an insubstantial number, but if we could prevent any potential opposition and make sure that every voter had all of the rationale for a bond, had all of the necessary information, I think the district could also conceivably pass the $287 million bond that raises taxes. My professional advice would be to avoid raising taxes based on the level of enthusiasm we see among voters when there's a bond scenario that can address district needs and not affect their property tax bill at the end of the day. This is just a quick look at those sort of ending audiences at the end of the survey after we've gone through that rationale. Again, we have 15% of likely voters who started out enthusiastically in support and end enthusiastically in support of a potential bond. We have 12% of voters who were completely convinced by the information in the survey, who may have started out some degree skeptical, but end up enthusiastic supporters of the bond, and 37% who are in that probably would vote for a bond category, which gives us a total of 49% of our likely voter audience is persuadable. That's a large, fertile ground for really being able to get out, distribute information about a bond, and ensure that we're getting voters to the polls well educated about the district's rationale here. We do still end the survey with 36%, so just over a third of voters who are at least some degree opposed to a bond. So we have 17% who we would call skeptical, but marginally softened by the information in the survey. I mentioned that we have some messages that sort of assuage them as they go through and understand the district's rationale. Even if they're not persuaded to support, they maybe move from that strong opposition to a soft opposition category. And then we end with 19% of voters who are really just intractable for us. They're staunchly opposed to a potential bond, and frankly, if anything, by the end of the survey, their opinions are hardened. It makes it worse. They're more likely to oppose than they were at the onset. Next slide. So this is just a quick look at the descriptions of each of these audiences and the messages that resonated with these audiences or were persuasive to these audiences or compelling. Rapid growth, the projects that would be funded by a bond, and capitalizing on the advantages we have now at this opportune time are the messages that were really a rallying cry for those voters that are our core supporters, our strongest proponents. They are evenly comprised of men and women, which was interesting to me given the level of discrepancy between women and men's initial support baselines. Our core supporters are just about 50-50 men and women. 74% of them do have children in the Weber School District, so parents and district staff and others who are directly involved with the district are most likely champions here. That's probably not surprising. And then nearly half are in that 35 to 54 age category, again, sort of coalescing with the years where we would expect them to have children currently in district schools. Our persuadable audience, the messages that are the most compelling for them focus on the opportune time, the advantages that the district has now if we go to bond, and the need for a new high school. The new high school message was especially effective or compelling to that persuadable audience. And then persuadable voters, again, significantly more likely to be women than men. We find that female voters are more persuadable in this county. Nearly half are ages 25 to 44, so we're addressing a slightly younger audience. Again, whether that's because they're likely to at some point have children entering the district or just they are more open to information presented about the bond. And then more than 2/3 do have children in the school district, and 40% have lived in the district for 20 years or less. All of this, I think, is the most starkly in contrast with our opposition. So our opponents are twice as likely to be men than women. More than half are over age 55. 45% do not have children in the district, so a majority do still have children attending schools in the Weber School District, but 45% do not, which is a pretty large constituency there. And more than 1 in 3 are long-time residents, meaning 41 years or more in the district. Those messages, again, that are sort of compelling to them, maybe soften the opposition, are those that focus on the legal requirements around bond funds and the emphasis that the district needs to do something to address the growth in the region. I believe that's it. There we go. Yep. So I'm happy to answer any follow-up questions that this may prompt, but that is our whirlwind tour of the likely voter survey data.
Board, that's a tremendous amount of information, and so appreciative of Kyrene and her team at Y2 Analytics. I think it's such valuable data for us as we're contemplating this important decision. This is a great time to ask any questions, seek some clarification while Kyrene is here. What are your thoughts?
So Kyrene, I have a question. That 4% margin of error, 3.7 margin of error. So if we were to be, ultra conservative, if we said the 56% minus the 4%, we would still be over 50%. Is that correct?
Yeah, our initial baseline, again, assuming that voters only see the ballot language, have no context, none of the district's rationale, our initial baseline suggests that $239 million bond scenario is likely to pass even in sort of a full 5 percentage point margin of error swing. We would still be looking at over 50% in support.
Thank you.
I have one, with our tax evaluation being up more than we thought, will that, or maybe Robert would have to answer this, would that affect our ability to, think how to say this correctly, our ability to go higher without affecting the tax rate?
Yeah, it would.
It might let us go higher, but construction costs might not increase the
Yeah, I
number
think
of projects
that's the issue
we could
right
do,
now. But Dean, you're absolutely observant that it increases our capacity. That's not Kyrene and her team. That would be more Preston and at Stiefel that are currently analyzing that. And the real issue we have to look at is what will be the real costs of these projects that are top of the list projects for us, and trying to factor in inflationary costs for those. And what we're already hearing from some of our architects and their projections, especially on the high school, that's the one that we're moving on, is that, and when I say that, just trying to get some ballpark data to know what would the cost be, but we were originally hoping in that 110, 120, and increasingly with construction costs increasing, that's being pushed to the limit. So what this might enable us to do is not squeeze that so tight. In the 2012 and the 2017 bond, we needed to find additional monies through sale of properties, through looking at capital outlay budgets, premium when bonds were sold, which is not going to be available to us in this next bond cycle. So those were some ways that we were able to make up that shortfall. Some of those ways are being eliminated. And so it's not going to be wise to not have some accurate projections on costs. But it gives us that a little bit more capacity to meet those cost needs.
Yeah, I guess what I was going to ask Kyrie is, do you think it would change the figures at all if we raised from, can't remember now, 230, raised it to 245 without a tax?
And I will say that all of the indicators in our data and in our prior experience suggest that that overall bond amount is significantly more negligible in voters' minds than their actual household impact. So if we're keeping the tax impact neutral, it's most likely that we're looking at the same level of support.
Thank you.
It's a great question.
The reason why that's a good question, and is because I've been working with Preston and Matt the last couple days, and our assessed value went up by 18.7%, which is the second highest that's ever occurred since I've been here for 20 years, and so that's a pretty high increase in assessed value, and we have every reason to believe that we'll have a 10% next, a minimum of double digit, 10%. And because we're already well into the kind of the next value year, and Preston is crunching the numbers right now, but he eyeballed it and he said we're looking at pushing, without a tax rate increase, over 270 million, 275. That's what he said, and so that will be interesting how much the construction, but that's indicative of how much the construction costs are going up too, and because right now on the high school we're at 139. And Scott's pulling all the stops and sweating bullets to try and keep that down, you know. So it's a real moving target.
I want to just emphasize something too. The appropriate thing would not be, in my opinion, to say how much could we bond for without raising the tax rate and go for that amount. The appropriate thing to do is to say which are our highest priority projects, and what is the closest estimated cost to achieve that. I think I've watched in other districts where it feels like the board's kind of gone this other way. How much can we bond for? And that's what we're going after. And it almost, I think, feels to a taxpayer like you're just asking for a blank check. So that, I think it's tremendous that we're going to have maybe a little more room than we were thinking, because we're getting squeezed on projections for construction of these top priority buildings. So to me, it comes back down to really getting as firm an estimate on these top priority projects. And that's the dollar amount. And I love the data that Kyrene has shared with us, that if we can keep that then inside of that number that we have that capacity for, there's no reason for us to go to that capacity if the projects that we've prioritized are under that.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah.
Jeff, can I ask a
Trying
question
to
there?
cushion, because in the last two bond cycles, we did our best to estimate and we were still short. And without premiums and other things like Superintendent outlined, we'd have been really stuck and would have had to not keep our promises and maybe drop the project off. But we were able to make it work. And so to me, that the cost, I totally agree with Superintendent. Prioritizing our needs is most important. I think the public would not like that blank check concept. They'd like, what are you going to do? How much do you think it's going to cost? You know.
Question for you: that 18.7% increase, do we know how much of it is new properties coming onto the tax roll versus reevaluation of existing property? Because the assessor is always doing that.
Approximately
just reevaluating existing property and raising the assessed valuation.
Close to 6% is new growth.
Okay.
And the remainder 12% is due to reassessments.
Because if the taxpayers might look at, even though we don't raise the rate, if their value of their property goes up, their taxes increased, if that makes sense.
One thing you'll see, I think, Doug, is that when Robert goes through the budget hearing later this evening, you'll see the board rates on the three levies that the board controls going down fairly substantially, in 10, 11% down.
Yeah.
So you'll see, you know, it's a fundamental aspect of taxation. In fact, it's what originally truth in taxation was known as in this state. We've come to see truth in taxation as a hearing that takes place before an increase. But the original truth in taxation was this concept that when values come up, rates come down,
Right.
so that taxing entities remain revenue neutral. And you'll see that because there was an increase in assessed values, you'll see the proposed tonight on the budget hearing that our tax rates come down. And so that fundamental concept is in play.
Right. My own property, home, last year went up. Even though the rate went down, we got reevaluated significantly, and the dollar amount of tax, the property tax that I paid, increased $300.
I'd be interested to, and you probably know it off the top of your head, but what about the dollar amount to Weber School District?
I think that went up.
Yeah.
Because mine went down. My value went up, but my dollar amount to Weber School District, and so it was some other taxing entities that increased their rate.
I'll have to look at that because I keep each year's. I'll check that, but paid $300 more, but I didn't check it line item by line item.
I think the thing that's important for the board to understand as you're working with taxpayers, especially as you prepare for a bond, is that the only thing this board controls are the rates.
Yeah.
And this board can show a history of rates declining almost every single year. We don't have control of assessed values. This board only has control of rates. And, you know, as we contemplate a bond, the only assurance that you can give to people is if the board decides that we're going to propose a bond scenario that does not raise the tax rate on debt service. That's all this board can do, is just because you're not in control of assessed values. What you're in control of is the rate, and the assurance, and we've done that now through 4 different bond cycles, the last 4 different bond cycles. The assurance is we're not going to raise the rate. That's the only real assurance this board can give, because you don't have control of assessed values.
That's correct.
Bruce, you had a comment.
Yeah, I did. I just had a question.
We can hardly hear you.
Robert, hold on just 1 minute.
Try it now.
Is that a little better?
Oh, much better.
Okay. Hey, Robert, you had indicated that you thought that there was no question that they were probably going to have assessed values around 10%. I just wanted to make sure the projection that we had was based on a 5% increase for next year. Is that correct?
Yeah, it was a very conservative. It was a 10% this year, and then we had one that was a 5. We also had one that was 2 10s in a row, and the one that was 2 10s in a row raised good amount of money.
Okay.
This 18.7 followed by a 10, if we assume a 10, and our knowledge from the county assessor and others is that a double-digit 10% is highly likely going forward.
That's good to know. I mean, that'll help us in the fiscal responsibility of making sure that does go down. The tax rate does go down.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Board, I think on behalf of all of us, we want to thank Kyrene and her team for this data. I would recommend to the board that over the coming weeks, that all of us remain in listening mode, that we're listening to our constituents, that we're seeking opportunities to receive feedback on various bond scenarios, appetite for increased tax rate, because what that really does is allow us to go further down a list of priorities. You know, there are a definite set of priorities. We'll always have capital priorities in the school district, whether it's from growth or whether it's for need of replacing aging facilities. And the key to a successful bond is to know how far down that list of priorities are you able to go? What's the appetite for taxpayers? Are they willing to only go so far that it doesn't raise the rate? Well, that's where the line has to be drawn. And then there are some still priority needs that may not make it to that top list, that top tier list. That really becomes the key. I want to let you know that Lane Finley and I have a plan probably in the next 2 to 3 months of attending every city council meeting, county commission meeting, and presenting to them some of the information that this board is wrestling with in terms of our needs around growth, our needs around replacing aging facilities, getting input from our community leaders. And I think this is the fertile time for us to be having those continued conversations. And I'd say in our board meeting in August, that's the time that we'll probably need to make a decision.
60 days or 90 days before when did the city, do you remember?
I don't recall.
I think that would be Ryan that will, Ryan Bjerke will help us, and we'll get that. But board, I think we're in a preliminary status, sitting in a great spot. Financially, we're in a good place. That we have the potential for a very significant bond without raising the tax rate. And we have a strong foundation of support. 60% is a good number to start with. I just think, you know, we're in a real good place in our school district on this, and it just behooves to us that we continue to seek feedback and listen, and be prepared to make a decision, most likely in our August meeting. Okay?
Thank you.
Thank you
Thanks
very
again.
much.
Board, let's see. Sherry, do you need? As you know, this past school year, in order to accommodate the needs that our teachers had to have additional time to work with students who were learning remotely, we modified the school schedule. And in this case, we shortened the day by 45 minutes. That gave teachers some time at the end of each day to work with those students who were learning virtually. I was pretty certain that once the pandemic, had kind of come to near resolution, we think we're close. Not going to say we're out completely, but we're in much better shape than we were at this time last year. I was fairly certain that flexibility would not be provided to us again. However, about 4 to 6 weeks ago, the State Board of Education waived once again the 990-hour rule that essentially provided local school boards with some additional autonomy, flexibility around the schedule. And so we conducted a survey, internal survey, using Qualtrics. Sherry has done a tremendous job with this. Sherry Hyder, our curriculum director, and also testing and assessment director. With your permission, would like Sherry to present some data that shows just feedback, input from parents, teachers, employees around the potential, the possibility of modifying, again, the schedule for next year. And that could be done for a variety of reasons, and we can have those kind of discussions. But President, with your permission, we'll have Sherry present some of this data.
Yes, please.
Sherry?
Thank you for giving me the opportunity to share with you some of the data highlights from this. Maybe.
Yeah, there you go.
Wow, I thought our friend Kyrene had just fixed all the tech issues, right? Except the on button. I can't imagine a board meeting that is more fun than 2 data presentations back to back. I'm sort of geeking out over there. So this should be super fun. Now ours is not truly as in depth as Kyrene and her analysis. So this is a little bit more fun to look at maybe. This first little statement that respondents saw just describes what superintendent just talked about relative to the state board's option for us to perhaps look at a modified schedule that came short of the 990 in order to accomplish some other goals. So we specified 2 goals. This did call out 45 minutes each day. It did not specify whether that would be morning or afternoon, so like a late start or an early dismissal, okay? 2 goals: seamlessly integrate a blended learning component so that we could enhance and enrich every student's experience with learning. And the second is to allow teachers a way to more personalize and customize that instruction for every child as they are learning. So first results that came back, we wanted to show you just a little bit as to who responded to our survey. This was a very, very quick survey. It was only open from May 11th to May 20th. It was sent out via email to all of our parents and all employees, both teachers and classified staff. So there were 8,232 responses to this, but keep in mind that some people could have clicked more than one because they had a child who attended more than one grade level band, okay? So elementary schools, 4,200, a little more than respondents. About 51.6% of our responses came from elementary. And you can kind of see there were actually almost 17% that didn't have any children who responded. So we did run all of this with a 95% confidence interval. So we're pretty confident about the data. It's a little interesting. This is a slightly different sample poll than what Kyrene and her folks did. That was a truly randomized sample. This was not. This was just who chose to respond to the survey. Okay. It does not want to advance. Oh, there we go. So the first question said, please indicate your level of support. Now notice this question is very important. It would include 45 minutes each day for teachers to increase blended learning opportunities to support student success and more effectively customize learning for every child. We believe what happened here is parents probably read this as what happened this year. So we had early dismissal. And because we didn't specify any other way, it turned out that 54.2% of our respondents were in favor. They supported the district implementing a schedule that allowed that 45 minutes, although we didn't say which way it would, which end of the day it would impact. Almost a quarter, so 1 in every 4 said, I am not supportive. And then there was 21% that said they don't have any strong feelings, but they put their faith in us to make the correct decision for student learning. Kind of an interesting model there. And notice here, and for most of the rest of the survey, we had about 7,600 responses. They were not required to answer the questions, so you will see that fluctuate just a little bit as we move through the questions. I did wonder, and thought you might be interested as well, did it matter the level of the grade level that students were in? For example, were elementary parents any more likely to vote for one option over the other? So I did a little quick analysis of that. The first set of responses, I'm supportive. The next set, I'm not, and then I don't have any strong feelings. So you'll notice that the not supportive, the ones who were not supportive of giving us this 45 minutes, mostly came from elementary school students. The responses we heard back, one of the things that we kind of looked back and said, maybe we should have done that a little differently. We did not allow for any comments. And I'm sure board members, you might have seen some of the results of this. Because we did not allow for comments, some of you received some emails. We received some emails with people fairly passionate about, one way or the other, whichever way they believed. Most of the folks that I talked to were elementary parents who were a little worried about getting their children off to school appropriately, or at the end of the day, children being home alone with no other siblings to supervise them. So kind of interesting. I also wondered, and I didn't do the analysis till later on, and you'll see that, I wondered if perhaps in different areas of the district by cone, if we had any different levels of response. So you'll see that as we come. This next portion, before the next question, we talked a little bit about some research, and you guys have seen it kind of across the state. There was even a task force in our district that studied the impact of maybe starting school just a little bit later on student learning. This was more, it tends to have more of an impact on adolescent learning, but there is some research to suggest that if students start school a little bit later, there may be some positive impact on student learning. So that was kind of elicit or enumerated there. And then the question was presented to them again. So during this year, 45 minutes was utilized at the end of the school day. Based on the information that we just saw that, there might be some impact to starting school a little bit later, now we asked them to look at what would happen if 45 minutes were to be used at the beginning of the day. So basically what we did here is we added one more response. So I support placement at the end of the day. So we start with beginning, and then end of the day, I still don't support it, and then I don't have any strong feelings either way. Now, look at what happened here when we presented this other option, which leads us to believe that they probably just assumed with the first question that it was going to be at the end of the day like it was this year. So when this question was asked, I support the placement 45 minutes at the beginning of the day. We were looking at about 41.2% of our respondents. So parents, faculty, staff. 29.9%, nearly 30% said I support it at the end of the school day. So if you add those two together, that's 71.1% of our respondents who were in favor of an alternate schedule that would give teachers a little bit of time to learn about blended instruction, blended learning, and also to build some of those opportunities into their instructional cycle. Look what happened to the I do not support. Where we were previously 1 in 4 respondents said no, now we're about 1 in 5, so 19%. It dropped 5.4% from the way we asked it in question 1. You'll also notice that when that additional response was offered, you know, the morning and the afternoon, we peeled off some of that, we don't really care, we just trust you to make the decision. We peeled that off and they tended to select an answer at this point. Okay, so kind of an interesting slide there. This was the one where I wanted to see if by any chance there was different levels of support based on the geographic area, the cone. So the cones are kind of represented by the color of that high school that they serve. So again, same order, I support the placement at the beginning of the day and then end. I don't support. Nothing really fantastic stands out there. Now the levels of support by school type. You'll notice still that it's kind of interesting. Elementary parents are still standing out as being against, but we did have, you know, we did have a drop, 6.2%. From the first time we asked the question. Our elementary parents were 6.2% more in favor of one of the options than they were the other. So even though we had, you know, various geographic areas, various levels of school represented, the support really wasn't statistically significant. I did find that I support the placement at the end of the school day by people who don't have children attending Weber School District schools. One thing that we did discover, because we had people reaching out to us who were both parents and employees, they reached out and said, well, how should I answer? Should I answer as a parent or as an employee? So I removed what's called ballot box stuffing. And that allows a parent to respond as a parent and as a teacher, or a parent and a school employee. And we did discover that there was one small contingent that answered the survey a few times, but it didn't statistically impact anything. Just a quick summary for you. There is definitely support for an alternate schedule that would allow our teachers the time they need to learn about and understand and incorporate those blended learning opportunities and more effectively personalize instruction. The survey responses were definitely not impacted significantly by either the school level or the geographic area in which the respondents lived. The respondents did tend to favor a delay of the start of school as opposed to an early out. That was about an 11.3% difference there. Now, if I might step out of my data role just a little bit and more into the curriculum side, we have a tremendous need to offer some intervention. You know, we've had some interesting things happen over the last 18 months, and we have students in need of really robust educator experience, right? As we move forward into this next year, the need for blended learning opportunities so that we can effectively meet the needs of all of our students it's just crucial right now. It is absolutely crucial. We know that teachers need that extra time. They need time to learn about it and then to implement it into their curricular plans. We have to be so careful about balancing that with taking time away from instruction. And that's the thing that I think I've heard more than anything from parents. Oh, we're coming back from a pandemic. We're so worried about, you know, reducing the amount of instructional time. I truly believe that we can mitigate that decrease in instructional time by the impact that our teachers will have with having some more skills in how to effectively deploy blended learning and this personalized learning opportunities for our students as well. Superintendent, with that data in mind, let me turn it back over to you.
Thank you, Sherry. That is just so helpful. Sherry's become so effective working with Qualtrics data, and it can give us some real-time information that just helps us make better decisions. Board, I look at this and I'll just tell you that when I saw the state board giving local boards some flexibility on the 990, I started to see some real possibilities long-term for this school district to transform in many ways the way we teach and learn. Um, I think the state board is very open to looking at models that accomplish the things that Sherry was talking about, and moving away from seat time as being the only sort of source of awarding credit. As we have received feedback, and as I've looked at the survey data carefully with Sherry, I can see several themes that have emerged through this process. Number one, there's a real need and a real desire to have teachers continue to build on the skill set that they began to develop, especially during this past year when they were reaching out to students virtually and helping students learn virtually. I don't think that is going to continue necessarily, that we're going to have that many students learning virtually, but they've begun to develop a skill set around being able to seamlessly integrate technology into their instruction in ways that enrich the learning experience tremendously and more effectively personalize and customize learning for each child. So that to me is the payoff for a parent, for example, who's concerned about the loss of instructional time. You say, well, the instruction that they're receiving with blended learning being seamlessly integrated into their curriculum, into their instruction on a daily basis, and the capacity of a teacher to more effectively personalize and customize for you is worth the loss of maybe some instruction. A second theme, certainly, and Sherry hit on it, is around that sleep study. We knew that this was something that there was a growing concern, requests from our parents to look at this. And so prior to the pandemic, we had a task force that was looking carefully at this. This might provide an opportunity to address that. But all of these things are counterbalanced by the real concern that people have around the loss of instructional time. So I think the questions for the board really involve, does the board believe that it would be valuable to continue some modified schedule? Does the board believe that there's some value in modifying the schedule next year and beyond so that some of these things could be addressed? If the board believes that there's some value in continuing with some sort of a modified schedule, then how much? 45 minutes, an hour, 20 minutes, how much? And that, where's the sweet spot between finding a place where there's some things that could be accomplished and yet not sacrificing too much instructional time, and then if so, where does that go? Does that go at the beginning of the day, at the end of the day? Board, I think those are the discussion topics that maybe need to take place among the board.
This additional time that the teachers will have available, is this discretionary teacher by teacher, or will there be some formal training or some structure? How does that?
That's a great question, Doug. I think that um, uh, this needs to help shape the way teachers are looking at this time. So I can see for sure that there's opportunities during this time for professional development. And I'm not talking the traditional, we've got to bring everybody together and have a meeting. I'm talking about, for example, our new teaching and learning director, Nick Harris, being able to provide a 10 to 12 minute training that could be delivered asynchronously. In other words, everybody doesn't have to be participating in this at a certain time. They could do this, when it works for them, but it could be around a particular skill that helps them achieve some of this blended learning, integrated learning that we're shooting for. I could see it also as a time for teams of teachers, grade level teams, departments to come together and look carefully at some data. Some of that data is going to be from common formative assessments that they have developed and administered themselves. Others of it is going to be from panorama data that this board has been tuned into, that our schools are going to be made aware of. So I can see it being used for a few of those things. But to your question, your point, I don't see this as just you have 15 more minutes to do what you've always done. If we do that, I don't think that we move the needle as a school district in terms of being able to really enrich the learning experience for students and really become more effective personalizing, customizing learning for students. So it's definitely going to be something that is shaped and become part of our very culture.
Jeff, could I ask a question there, Jeff, when we get done?
Go ahead, Bruce.
So I think one of the problems is, for me maybe, is that I think the public is assuming that blended learning is what we did last year. Means the teacher all of a sudden goes online for 45 minutes at the end of the day. What we're seeing is this is a totally different approach to that, and I think there maybe needs to be some awareness on what takes place. It's been how appreciative we've been just to see all the input from the various individuals that have, and from extremes on both sides. And we've had emails that are very passionate, as Sherry indicated, on both sides of the fence and everywhere in between. And I feel that part of that may be the definition of blended learning.
Bruce, that is an excellent point, and I just think you're spot on with that. That's something that will need to be made very clear if the board decides that they want to move forward with some sort of a modified schedule. That blended learning is not. This is the time that you're working with students who are learning virtually. This is a seamless integration of technology into their teaching in ways that really enrich the learning experience for students and more effectively customizes, personalizes learning for students. And it just becomes a seamless integration of technology. You're right, it's not something different. It's not going to be, for example, teachers, you have 15 minutes to prepare an assignment that students will now do virtually online. That's not at all what we envision. That in no way would move us forward as a school district in terms of being able to significantly transform the way teaching and learning occurs. So Bruce, that point is spot on.
If I could, Superintendent, this is off the cuff, but because we have them in the room, I'd like to ask the two supervisors, Cammie and Gina, your thoughts about this, and even possibly maybe in your opinion at the time of where we're at. You can come up together.
You know, I think if I speak confidently for our administrators. We've had a lot of discussions around this, and one of their major concerns, as principals especially, is how do we keep the supports that are already working and in place for our kids in our schools? We're definitely not broken in our school district. We've got the supports. This year was broken. This year was broken with the pandemic, and so one of their main concerns is how do we keep our teachers moving forward with a new mindset around technology and integrating technology and growing around technology. So I think they're very supportive of that piece and keeping that centered on how do we use that technology as a tool to support student learning and differentiate for kids that might have fallen behind due to their circumstances. So I think they're very supportive of that. We do have wonderful supports in our schools going on. And so I think if we can, like Dr. Stevens said, seamlessly integrate this piece into it, we'll kind of have the whole enchilada, so to speak, if we do it right. That's kind of what we're talking about at secondary.
I would agree with everything that Gina just said. I myself was like Bruce. I didn't really understand the definition of blended learning. And then my friend Sherry Hyder over there, she drew a picture, literally. And it made so much sense to me what she was talking about, because elementary is already built for small group instruction, rotations, where a group will work with the teacher and then go practice something or learn something new. So a few minutes every morning to help a teacher see how technology can benefit that process and that procedure, I think is a very great idea. One of the things that I spoke with Dr. Stevens about is you think about all of the printing that goes into, I've got to get this group ready for this and this group ready for this. All of that becomes more seamless with the use of technology because every child has a Chromebook. So that becomes a take out your Chromebooks and here's what I'm assigning you to look at, view, learn. So I think we can do some great things if we integrate this technology piece very carefully and give teachers time to practice and use it. So
Thank you. And that works into what Dr. Stevens was talking about with Nick Harris on that particular issue. So muchly appreciate it.
President Ritchie, I have a couple questions. The management of this delivery, I think we have already some very overtasked administrators. And so the management of the delivery of the technology pieces, do we have a plan for that, or could we have a plan for that? And then secondly, I don't like to use the word accountability, but is the deployment of the delivery integrated into teacher evaluation tools? So those are a couple questions I have.
Those are great questions. You're right. Our administrators have full tasks and full plates, but their highest priority is student achievement. And at the heart of this discussion, it really ought to be around, does this have the potential of improving teaching and learning in our school district? That's the key. And that's the top priority of any administrator. And I think that this has the potential of improving the quality of instruction in every classroom and for every student if it's done right. Does the principal need to lead this? Not necessarily. We have an outstanding curriculum department. In November, we organized a Department of Digital Teaching and Learning. We have other resources that can provide support to our administrators and ultimately our teachers in terms of the content, if you will, of that professional training, that professional development. And so it allows a principal to maintain his or her focus with teaching and learning at the very top of that list, but with support to accomplish that. And I fully believe that teachers own this. You know, the whole notion of distributed leadership um, uh, is is very much a part of this school district. We don't believe that leadership resides within one individual at the school. The idea that there's a distributed leadership and teachers are very much a part of that. Every one of our schools has leadership teams that are made up of teachers across the board that are providing that kind of support. In terms of your question on accountability, um, let me just share something on that. This is probably more of a personal thing. I always prefer to use the term responsibility. Now think about the difference between accountability and responsibility. Accountability suggests that someone from the outside is sort of questioning whether or not, you know, you're doing what you ought to be doing. When you're responsible for something, where's that coming from? Inside. I haven't met a teacher in this school district that in 35 plus years that I haven't felt like feels responsible to their students. And there's a difference in motivation. Are you more motivated when you feel accountable or when you feel responsible?
Responsible.
Think about your own parenting. Did anybody hold you accountable for that? But you felt very much responsible. It's the same with teachers and students. And so, you know, here's an opportunity for us on that front to allow some of that to shift away from just simply being accountable to feeling that ownership and responsibility. And maybe that's off the point a little bit, Jan. That's probably more a personal.
I think my worry is, my fear is, as a former teacher, that I do feel responsible. I do feel like I want to do it, but I don't have the skills for that delivery. And so if I don't know how to get them, or am not, maybe required is the wrong word, but I'm not encouraged to acquire those skills, how does that happen?
Yeah, and that makes complete sense. And I think that we are capable in this school district, the way we're currently organized, of providing all of the support for a teacher to get what you're asking for, to get that level of training available to them, have them working with within their grade level teams, departments, to provide that collaborative support to get teachers to that level. But there's no question that this represents potentially some change for us. But I truly believe that it represents an opportunity to transform some things in the school district, looking a year, 3 years, 5 years down the line, because the cumulative effect, somebody will say, well, 15, 20 minutes, even 45 minutes. What can you do in that? You do that day after day, week after week, month after month, year after year. The cumulative effect of that, I truly believe, has the potential to raise the quality of teaching and learning in this school district beyond where it's ever been.
Very savvy. And the thing that's been missing
access that person.
sit down side by side with that ed tech coach, right? So in a way, the way I think about it, because elementary schools already have a 30-minute, morning time, like that, they're required to be there. Now you add 20 minutes. There's days that they can sit with an ed tech coach for some time and get that personal, or with their team, and work specifically like on, combined with the fellows,
Specific skills.
just like exactly how do I get at these kids who are deficit? And I feel like Dr. Stevens is right that the structure within the district would lend well to supporting teachers, and that piece of time might be the theme.
Well, I think we've been moving that way for a long time, just with our PLCs, with that idea that we are more closely looking at data, and I think we'll probably have some forthcoming data that will say what specifically our kids are needing, what our students are needing, and perhaps if we were able to clearly define what those needs are, and then say how can technology address those needs, it would be very helpful.
Exactly right.
Can-
Exactly right.
If I could have someone side by side with me, whether it be a tech coach or a fellow or whomever,
Yeah.
but if they could side by side with me as a teacher, that would have been very, very helpful for me.
Should I just ask a question? Are we talking about ending school at the time that it ended this year with 45 minutes taken out of the day? Or are we talking about ending school at the time it ended before the pandemic? And I can see us meeting the needs of two different ideas. One is possibly shortening the day by, let's say, 20 minutes. If we do that, high school would start about 8 o'clock, and elementary school would probably start 20 minutes later than it does now. I'm assuming, I don't know what time does elementary school usually start?
Roughly
8:30?
8:25, 8, and some of it varies based on transportation schedules and so forth, but roughly 8:30.
So if we gave the high school kids 20 minutes longer to sleep or to get to school or whatever, we're meeting the needs of those folks that are asking for longer sleep time for kids. But by moving it 20 minutes later for elementary school, do we cause the parents of those kids some issues that they haven't had? But I don't know. Been way too long since I had elementary school kids in my house. I can't really relate to that. If we're talking about getting school or letting school out at the time it was out before the pandemic, that would be an hour basically. I'm just kind of rounding things off, but 20 minutes in the morning and then 40 minutes into the day for blended learning or whatever. I don't know. Those folks would have to work out those things, but I can see a real possibility of meeting the needs of parents who still want their kids to have a full day of school, which I think is important. We don't want to take an hour or 20 minutes out of a kid's school day and not accomplish anything by it. But I think it's important that we have the kids. There are some kids that have lost some education because of the pandemic, and somehow we have to find a way to help them too. So I guess what I'm leaning towards, after hearing what everybody's had to say, is I think I would like to look at shortening the day, maybe 20 minutes, and um, and leaving the rest of the time for blended learning or whatever works best. I've met with uh, uh, Weaver High School and with North Upton Junior High to see how it would affect them. Um, Basically, North Ogden they're happy with the way things are going. And, they basically said, we'll do whatever you want or need to do. But um, at least that's what I'm thinking. I don't know what the rest of you are thinking.
I think, Dean, that the key that we've learned from this is it's not necessarily the amount of minutes we're in school, but the quality of instruction of what we deliver when they're there. And we have an opportunity to perhaps put some new thoughts around how curriculum is delivered, and we can do it within that mod. So whatever the time is doesn't really necessarily uh, that would have to be something our professional educators look at and decide what could they best do, and then let them do what they do very, very well to increase the quality of instruction.
Jan, can I just add to that for a second? I really appreciate that, Jan and Dean. Both of those sound terrific to me. One thing that I always has been in the back of my mind, even no matter what that time is, if we do that in the morning, and that is in the forefront of the teacher's mind as this training happened 20 minutes, first thing in the morning, and that's in the forefront of that teacher's mind throughout that day, that lesson continues to be taught not only to the teacher but to those students. What she'll find or he will find places in the day that says, oh, that would fit perfectly. And I think it becomes a day of learning rather than just a 20-minute session in the morning.
Bruce, I couldn't agree more. And so I guess as we lead this discussion, the three who have not said anything, Janice, Paul, and Doug, I want to make sure you have a chance to say something as we narrow this down is when and how. That's ultimately, I kind of think, what we're shooting for here. So again, I'm just going to leave it open.
Well, I'm very appreciative of the input and the thoughts from various directions, and I'm very dependent on and hopeful that our experts, our teachers, will come forward with what they see as most advantageous to them. Jan, with her counseling background, again, the most important thing is quality of education for each of these precious students. And so I am open and willing and anxious to support what appears to be the most advantageous overall to the students.
Well, it seems like our surveys gave us some pretty good marching orders. And so we move forward with those surveys in mind, and with the student at the core of every decision. To me, that seems like.
Can I make a suggestion then? Bruce, the other board members have chosen not to, but we'll finish with the discussion or maybe a suggestion. And that suggestion would be that maybe we give the district administration and Sherry, as part of that group, based off of the information they have, the direction to come up with a plan within that certain suggestion of time of what they want to do and how it works best for us. And we'll move forward with, we like the change. We like the potential. But you have the numbers, they have the numbers. They are boots on the ground every day, bring us recommendations on, and we'll just let them guide them to what works best for our district right now. Because we're amenable to change. Is that?
Well, President, let me just try to articulate and summarize. First, I'm so impressed with the board's not only willingness, but the capacity to listen to constituents. And the number one priority is the goal of, Janice, just as you've expressed, to ensure the quality of instruction for every child in the school district. That this is something that is not being done simply to give more preparation time. That's not the goal. The goal is that we become more effective delivering high quality instruction so that every child in this school district can achieve at a higher level. And we believe that the seamless integration of technology, this blended learning component, done effectively, can help to accomplish that, right? So that I think is the foundation of what I'm hearing from the board is the direction that you want us to go. Keep that as the priority. And we can establish some parameters, I think, Jan, that address some of the concerns that you expressed around some structure, some expectations, some benchmarks. Right. I think we can, I know we can accomplish that. Number two, I'm hearing from the board that maybe 45 minutes is too much. That the loss of that much instructional time might be counterproductive to what we're trying to accomplish. But that doesn't mean that we couldn't do something. And what I'm hearing is something more in the neighborhood of 15, 20 minutes, right? And that might, as we start building individual school schedules, you might find some of that. But again, not a full 45 minutes, but somewhere in the neighborhood of 20 minutes, 15, 20 minutes, something like that. The other thing I'm hearing from the board, and also reinforced from the data that we received, more seem to think that putting that time at the beginning of the day would be beneficial. It addresses kind of two things. It addresses giving time to improve teaching and learning, but it also helps to address some of those who are concerned about maybe a few extra minutes in the morning. And some will say, well, it's not enough, but it's something. And I'm so appreciative of the board being responsive to all of these different voices that are coming at us, and taking a moderate but a bold step with this. So Doug? Yes, very much. Yes. I love that, and I think we've heard that. So, board, if I've expressed that the way you're kind of sensing that we ought to move forward, then administratively we will begin immediately to build some schedules that that address that for this coming year. And Dean, to your question, I'm then anticipating that end times, release times, will be very close to where they were pre-pandemic. Not this past year, but pre-pandemic, right? So you're able to address some of the sleep concern issues without creating the complications that come from extending the day because we've got the flexibility. Okay.
Dr. Stevens, if I could though, before we move, I'd like to just clarify one thing. You mentioned the 20 minutes.
Yeah.
Could we give you just a little more and then you recommend what works best? I really don't.
Yeah.
If I could push 25 or even 28 minutes, not 45, but if we feel like maybe our best opportunity, and I'm not the expert, I'm just suggesting 15 worked, but give me 18 and 22 is better. Maybe we start there and is that acceptable?
We'll
I think
we'll
we
kind
look
of
at a
shoot.
moderate
We'll
what
kind of
it
shoot
is.
for that 20-minute, roughly in that 20-minute, and just know that every school has a little bit difference, but I think roughly speaking, it's going to put secondary start times right about 8 o'clock. And we've got some secondary schools now that are starting at 7:35. And then I'll work carefully with Scott and Kristen down at Transportation to see how much turnaround time do we need. Can we squeeze that from 45 minutes to 40 minutes? Just what we're able to do there. And it might be that maybe we start our elementary schools 10 minutes later and end them 10 minutes earlier. Maybe we'll see, and I'll work carefully with Cammie and Dave and Kristen and Scott on some of those transportation needs. We've got a meeting scheduled in the morning with the directors, and we'll start to work on this. But I appreciate the direction on it.
Just another clarification. Our August board meeting has potentially really, especially if we proceed with the bond. And would it be wise to maybe have a study session in late July to digest everything that the administration gives, so that goes more smoothly in the August board meeting? Just a thought.
No. Okay.
I think we can handle this administratively.
Okay. And you'll brief us and just
Yeah.
you're working well. That's all not a problem. I agree.
And this is you'll notice on the agenda tonight, it wasn't an action item. This is not something the board needs we just need some direction, and I think we've received it, and we can now address it administratively.
Okay. Will it be possible to put that, the survey results maybe on the district website?
That's a great idea.
I've had several people ask if they could see them, and I told them, I'm sure they can, I just didn't know where it would be.
Critical for transparency.
And you know, the other thing, I think once we pull some planning together, and as we start to communicate that, Gina and Cammie, I think it would be very helpful to integrate some of that survey data into those information letters going out to parents and students that announce changes, that the board's really sought feedback and input from parents and teachers and constituents around this matter. And we'll include, I think we can put it on our website. I think we can include it in letters that go out to parents when we ultimately announce a school schedule for that particular school. Great suggestion, Paul.
Yeah. And I'm great with the 20 minutes. If all of us done 20 minutes a day on learning, I wouldn't be the hillbilly of this group.
It was the 20 minutes in the west parking lot. That was the problem. And I wasn't with you. Let's move on to the next action item, shall we? That would be the approval of, oh, by the way, thank you everybody for your input and staff for helping us as a board to get through that and your expertise on where we're going. It's going to be exciting, big time. So thank you. The next item on the agenda would be the approval of revised policy 4370 on graduation requirements on a second reading. Jennifer Warren, please.
Superintendent Stevens, board, we're here for a second reading on the additions to policy 4370. Last month at the board meeting, we proposed an addition to the policy 4370 to add the career development credential. This is a credential that would layer on top of the diploma for students who meet the criteria, and part of the criteria is an IEP or a 504, as well as additional completion of a CT pathway, some work-based learning opportunities prior to graduation. And so at this time, we are requesting approval. There have not been any recommendations for changes or additions to the policy. So we are requesting an approval on a second reading.
Board, you've heard the proposal from Ms. Warren on the acceptance on a second reading of the approval of revised policy 4370 graduation requirements. I'd entertain a motion.
So moved.
So moved by Jan, second by Paul. Any discussion?
Yes, so this is a statewide, so it was written into state board policy. It's the administrative rule R277-705 as part of the secondary completion and diploma. So this is just an addition to ours to align with the state.
Really enhances opportunities for our special needs students to recognize some of the, parts of their IEP that are built into their specific plan and be able to give them that credential, if you will.
Right.
We sure saw some phenomenal things at our life graduation
Yes.
from that type of opportunities for them. So
You good? Are we good? Any other discussion? All in favor?
aye.
Aye, motion carries. Thank you.
Thank you.
Why don't you just stay right there? Approval of
Sure.
revised policy 2360, special education transportation on the first reading. Jennifer, please.
So we are requesting an amendment to the special education transportation policy. It's policy 2360. This policy has been in place for 2 years. It outlines the parameters for special education transportation as part of a related service to the student's IEP. At this time, the amendments that we're asking for in the policy that we shared with you is to clarify for schools, parents, and transportation what those eligibility considerations are when an IEP team is meeting and deciding if transportation needs to be a related service in order for the student to access their education.
Board, you've heard the presentation on approval of revised policy 2360, special education transportation on a first reading. Entertain a motion. So moved by Dean, second by Jan. Any discussion? All in favor? Aye, motion carries. We will see you in August.
Okay,
Thank you so much. Board, our next item on the agenda would be the approval of the Northeast Commercial Project Area. Dr. Stevens, please.
Thank you, President. Board, I'd like to introduce Doug Larson, who this board knows well. We appreciate working with Doug on other projects in the past. On this particular project, Doug is working with Marriott Slaterville, and the Northeast Commercial Project is one that we have taken through our board tax increment funding guidelines, that process that we laid out. It now is ready for recommendation to the board, and I'm going to turn the time to Doug to touch upon the highlights of that. And board, you're welcome to ask any questions, and then we'll seek a motion on it.
Well, good evening. It's a pleasure to be be here with you as always. And thank you, Superintendent. Again, the Northeast Commercial Community Reinvestment Project area. Um, I should start out with again saying I'm here on behalf of Marriott Slaterville City.
Doug,
as
I
their
might have you
consultant.
just take the microphone and
Yep.
speak right into it.
As their consultant. Again, as the superintendent indicated, this request to support tax increment financing project area plan, again, from Marriott Slaterville City has been through your subcommittee. It's a 133 acre project area just north of 400 North in Marriott Slaterville. The largest portion of it is on the east side of I-15 with another portion on the west side of I-15 with its northern boundary, essentially being the city boundary in Marriott Slaterville. Primary purpose for the project area and the request is to have that tax increment, the new property tax revenue that's generated from new development and new growth within the project area to support investment in public infrastructure only. The tax increment will not go back to the developer. As I think all of you know, Marriott Slaterville does not have, they do not, as a city, impose a property tax. So we're requesting all the property tax entities support this project over a 15-year period at 55% participation. That means that those entities would give up 55% of the new revenue over that 15-year period and also enjoy 45% of the new revenue that's generated from development. We've asked Weber County to participate at 60% because we believe there will be some retail development that will occur within the project area, of course, generating sales tax. And they're the only entity besides the city that benefits from that. The city, because they don't have a property tax, is supporting the project area by waiving just over $1.1 million in fee reductions or fee waivers. Currently, in that 133 acre project area boundary, the school district is currently receiving just over $55,000 a year in property tax. Again, the city's requesting participation at 55%. So the average annual new tax increment that we're estimating you'll receive over that 15-year participation period, your 45%, will average just about $180,000 a year during that 15-year period. At the end of the 15-year period, we estimate just about $440,000 a year in annual property tax revenue to the Weber School District. Again, I want to highlight that the restricted use of this tax increment is for public infrastructure. What we mean by that is that primarily we will be supporting transportation infrastructure. There'll be a need for interchange improvements just east of I-15 off 400 North. This is a live project. It actually over the year plus from when the city first spoke to some initial developers, many of you may know that's already occurring. So this is a real project that will generate revenue as advertised and as we expect to happen over the next number of years, particularly on the east side of I-15. That's my 5-minute version. I think I gave you the math and an understanding, and if you have questions, please let me know.
I want to emphasize too that the average $182,000 is on top of the 55,000 that would serve as a base for the 15 years. And so, you know, there's no question the district benefits even in year one financially from this. So President would seek a motion approving the interlocal agreement between the Community Reinvestment Agency of Marriott Slaterville and the Weber School District on this particular project in the Northeast Commercial Project area.
Just a quick question. That includes that Amazon facility that's under construction?
That's the primary development, yes, sir.
Yeah.
We anticipate a maximum investment between, within the entire project area of about $75 million within the next 5 years. What is occurring on the east side of I-15, primarily that distribution warehouse, we anticipate that to generate over $50 million in assessed value. That's a primary part of the development, yes, sir.
Doug, I had a question early on about how this thing could get started without, the interlocal agreement, and the primary investment is private. Over $70 million is a private investment in this, and approximately $7 million is a public investment. So that would be from not only Weber School District, but Weber County and the other taxing entities, correct? So there's a significant private investment in this development, and that's why it's really able to.
So I'm not going to repeat what Dr. Stevens just said. You heard what it was, so I'm just going to entertain a motion. Paul, moved by Paul. Second by Dean. Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye, motion carries. Thank you. Dr. Stevens.
The next is an amended interlocal agreement with the Community Redevelopment Agency of Marriott-Slaterville, but it was related to an earlier interlocal agreement dealing with Jeremiah's. In August of 2020, the legislature passed a bill that allowed an agency to extend by 2 years the amount of time that they're able to collect on this a particular project. And Marriott-Slaterville has been tremendous to work with, working with Doug, and essentially this amendment allows them not only to extend that interlocal agreement by 2 years, but significantly to Weber School District to include a secondary water project that brings secondary water to our 12th Street facility. That would be of tremendous benefit to us. And so this is a project that gets taken care of through this particular CRA and interlocal agreement, and it's done simply by extending the 2-year time period from which this money can be collected. And so, President, once again, I'd recommend a motion that would support the amended interlocal agreement with the Marriott-Slaterville Community Redevelopment Agency and Weber School District that includes those proposals that I just outlined.
At Jeremiah's.
Correct.
At Jeremiah's.
Correct.
Having stated that, Dr. Stevens, I'd entertain a motion. Paul?
Second.
Second by Jan. Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Motion carries. Next one would be the approval of the amendment of CRA at Sierra RV. Dr. Stevens.
I'll take this one also, I guess, Doug.
I'm
Very similar.
Happy to support it any way you want.
This is again an amended proposal to an interlocal agreement that was originally with Marriott-Slaterville related to the Sierra RV. The amendment, just like with the Jeremiah's, extends the collection period by 2 years, but also adds a secondary water project to Pioneer Elementary. Right now we're using culinary water at Pioneer, and it's expensive. And so this would be something that would be very beneficial to the school district. So again, President would recommend a motion to support the amended Community Redevelopment Agency, the interlocal agreement between Marriott-Slaterville and Weber School District.
At the Sierra RV location.
Correct.
So moved by Doug, second by Dean. Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Motion carries. Thank you, Doug.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for your work and what you do to assist us.
Oh, you're welcome. My pleasure.
Doug and their manager, Bill Morris, and their city council and mayor have all been terrific to work with. Doug, if you could communicate that we have appreciated their work and their support on all of these.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Board, the next item on our agenda would be ratification of employees' contract. Please, Ms. Lori Rasmussen.
Well, hello, good evening. Hey, I just have one number to throw at you, so I think it will go well. Superintendent Stevens, President Ritchie, and board members, it is my pleasure to inform you that the negotiations with all three of our employee groups are complete. I want to take a minute and thank Larry Hadley. And as Dr. Stevens mentioned, Larry wanted to be here to present this wonderful news, but his daughter is coming home today from a mission, so he's there picking her up. But he did a wonderful job leading through this process. And board, I want you to know that we have an amazing relationship with all three employee groups. And it kind of helps throughout the year that we have this constant communication and consistent communication with all groups. So when it comes time to sit down at negotiations, there's a lot of trust built up and that relationship is strong and negotiations just seem to go smoothly. So because of that, we were able to get a lot accomplished. There were three major factors in the negotiations for this year, which was the cost of living adjustment, or the COLA, the insurance package, and then an HSA. So I'm going to read that summary so I don't miss anything. So it was agreed upon for the 2021-22 school year that the district will fully fund lane changes, step increases, a 5.75% base increase, and an increase to the HSA. It was also agreed upon for the 21-22 school year that the insurance plan would have no cost to employees, to their share of the employee health premium. And it was also agreed that the district's base insurance plan for eligible employees would be a qualified high deductible plan paired with the HSA account. And there, I think the increase to that, Robert, was $100.
The contribution is $100, so for $1,200 for a family.
That's right. Okay.
And our contribution for the insurance is about 3.5%, and the employees
was zero.
Zero.
Okay. So, do you have any questions about that information? Okay. Other items of note are in your board book. Larry submitted that. And there were several, items of interest in your board book. There were several MOUs that we entered into and that were written that we'll work through this year and kind of take care of some things that they had asked for, but we're going to look at them through the upcoming year. So, board, with that information, I ask that you ratify our negotiated agreements.
Thank you, Lori. Board, I would entertain a motion that we ratify the negotiation agreement with, and I want to be specific, certified employees, support professionals, and administrators for this upcoming year. Entertain a motion.
So moved.
So moved by Dean, second by Jan. Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Motion carries. Thank you. Thank you, Larry. Please let him know from the board. Really much appreciate that. Relationships are big, 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 and we've seen that so much tonight.
Or just so you know, that's the highest COLA in at least 20 years. So it's tremendous that, yeah.
President Ritchie, I want to be sure to thank the Weber Education Association and the Weber Administrators Association and the Weber Support Personnel Association. They were fantastic throughout this, and wanted to also thank the employees from Weber School District. Many served on those committees, so just wanted to thank them. So thank you.
And I echo that as much as everybody has to bend and take a little bit, and I think that's what kind of happened here in order to make this change on this major COLA, as well as other things happen. So it's a great direction to go. It's a great time to be at Weber School District in more ways than one. So thank you for everybody.
Yeah, there's a little change on the insurance, that's for sure, going to all HSA and a sole source provider, but that was the thing that allowed for the 5.75. So we appreciated the insurance committee. That's where that came from. The insurance committee that's well represented made that recommendation. And that's really what enabled a little better COLA to be given to all of our employees.
Thank you, Dr. Stevens, for that clarification. The next item would be the budget hearing. Dr. Peterson, do I open that to a public meeting? So I'd entertain a motion to open to public comment for the budget board. So moved by Paul. Second by Dean. Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
It is now open.
You need a standing break, you can stand well. I don't know. Okay, what was just handed to you is a finalized copy of our budget. It's a very simple document. It's a big summary document. The main document that we submit to the state board is a lot more extensive. Also, this has preliminary sheets that give a lot of descriptors, and I'll quickly go through those and highlight things that need to be highlighted. This is very similar to what we've done in the past couple of years. But if you go to the, starting on page 1, is it says revenue at the top, and I'm also just going to go. You'll see those same pages on the board, so that you can follow along on the screens if you choose. Okay. First off, revenue. People want to know, where does our money come from? And I won't go through this line by line. Just summarize it. You can see our biggest fund is the M&O fund, and about 32%. Or I mean 13% rather, 32 million, 13% comes from local sources. And the state has about 82.56% of the total revenue, and federal about 4.2. Total revenue is well over 240 million on the M&O fund. Another fund that we have is the school services fund. You can see in this fund, the federal amount is the biggest, with 52%, 19% at local, 28%, 28% local, 19% state. That state portion is the state liquor tax, and the most of that local portion, and this is the prior year, is school lunch proceeds from sales. The capital outlay fund is almost all local. Property taxes are sitting at about 16 million. You can see investments, capital leases, and then bond proceeds. We issued a bond along with its associated premium of 37.8 million. We get a little bit from the capital outlay formula. This is one that we're striving to improve. Jeff and I have talked about this at length. We've contacted key legislators, and task force has been, a committee has been initiated for the business administrators to look at this and make recommendations. We hope to get a bigger share of this state funds, this capital outlay, in future years. Right now, though, it's pretty low. Student activity fund, this is basically what's at schools. It's all considered local. The foundation, once again, all considered local. And then the debt service fund, all considered local. 17 million, this is what pays off the prior year bonds. So if you look at the bottom of page 1, all revenue, or funds for all revenue, total revenue, all funds rather, we're dominated by the state, almost at 60%. Next comes local at 35%, and 4.8, less than 5% is federal. Some may argue that, oh, we don't have that much federal money. Do we need the federal money? Yes, we do. That 16 million is a lot of money. We would be hard pressed without our federal dollars. Let's look at the expenses. Go to page 2. The big takeaway here is that we are a people business. And when it comes to M&O fund, almost 92%, 91.88, you can see, is compensation. In the M&O fund, a little more than 8 is non-compensation. And you can see it is dominated instruction. We teach, we educate. Another big takeaway, and I pointed this out in years past, our district administration and staff constitutes about 2.1% of the total expenses in the M&O fund. So it's accurate to say that we are very lean, and there is very little administrative fat. About the only table muscle is with me and my gut. So that we're very lean. School food services, compensation is about 45%. Non-compensation is 54%. About close to 6 million of that is food purchases, and the rest is equipment and supplies. Capital outlay fund, you can see, is almost all non-compensation. We spent a lot that year in, we were building schools. Student activity fund is much more non-compensation than compensation. The foundation, once again, is weighted non-compensation. Debt service is all non-compensation. So in the aggregate, total all funds, compensation, that is everything from wages, salaries, Social Security, retirement, long-term disability, workers' comp. Those are all considered compensation things at 232 million or 66%. And our non-compensation is 117 million. Okay, that's kind of how we spend things. Let's go to the next projected fund balances. The first top section is fiscal year 20. That's where we ended the year. You can see our total fund balance was 60 million in that bottom right corner of that first section, 60,562,000. An important number that we key on is the unassigned. It's this 15,778,000. That's what we ended the year last year. That's kind of unrestricted monies that we have to spend on things should a contingency arrive. Some may argue that 15.7 million is a lot, but when you're talking a $244 million budget as a percent of the total, it is not. It is sufficient, but it is not excessive for sure. We estimate a flat year. Our general fund, we're seeing it will drop from about 41.6 million to 40.8. The reason why it's dropping is because there's this line called other programs, and we've committed a little over $1 million from that to pay for the Roy High turf field. That was already pre-designated by the board and by our staff to do that. We expect the unassigned to stay relatively flat, and hopefully the big hit that we're taking this year is interest income. Our interest rates have dropped quite a bit. We have most of our money invested in the State Treasurer's Fund. It's called the PTIF, Public Treasurer's Fund, and the interest rate is now at 0.4% on that fund. It's very low. It dropped from 2 to 0.4. The debt service fund is healthy. Capital fund, we're done with building from the 2017 bond election, and we'll settle in at about 6 million on a reserve. CNP, child nutrition, 2.4 million. That's going to go up a little, and I'll show you a little bit of detail on that in a minute. The student account fund will be roughly the same, and the foundation a little higher. Okay, so that's our fund balance basically is sufficient and steady as she goes. Let's look at the budget highlights. So most of these were covered by Lori in her summary of the ratification. Just to reiterate, because it was great news. Compensation, steps and lanes, we estimate at about $875,000. A base salary increase of 5.75% is 7.7 million. Health insurance costs.
Robert?
Yes.
So that base salary increase, so what's a starting wage for a teacher now?
$46,000.
Wow.
Yeah.
Even.
Lane one, step
It was
one.
about $60 short of that, and I twisted Robert's arm a little bit.
Yeah, he did.
So the starting salary for a teacher is $46,000 even.
4 times what I.
Yeah.
That's a little higher than when Jen Burrell started.
Yeah, about 4.5 times as much.
Health insurance cost $904,000, and then the HSA contribution about $123,000.
that's giving $100 more for all levels. So the those with a family plan will get $1,200. Those with a couple plan will get a little over $1,000, and those with a single plan will get over $800 contributed by the district. We also added in a half-time junior high school counselor. This helps us keep up with our counseling ratios. We just kind of chip away at this every year. Also, we added 4 part-time elementary office aides to full-time. That's $105,000. And we will finish the 5, because of COVID, it turned into a 6-year endeavor, but we will finish that next year. And I think I can speak on behalf of Cami. It's well appreciated and well used out at the elementary schools. Is that correct? Okay. So how do we pay for this $9.7 million of new expense? Local property tax growth, we're being very conservative when we say $945,000. TSSA money, we get 25% of any new money to help with compensation. Increase in voted and board leeway state aid. The state has really beefed that up. We're saying almost $3 million. We're taking a hit in interest income, and so we're showing that hit of $1,100,000. It's a negative. And then the rise in the value of the WPU by 5.92. I always like to emphasize 5.92 because it's not 6%. People will round up, it's 5.92. That's significant. One of the things with that is even with the 5.92, we're able to offer an unprecedented 5.75% base increase. And we're doing that because of the add-on in these other areas. That would be impossible to do without those other add-ons. This conservative $7,592,000 is based on a 0.74% growth. This is from the state's legislative estimates. And I'll show you how conservative that is in a minute. But the total ongoing revenue we estimate to be greater than the total ongoing expense. And that's how the budget, this is the big portion of the budget going forward. Capital outlay, let's just summarize where we've been. The Fremont High allocation, you can see, it seems like so long ago we made that addition, that Fremont High additions. Then we got Silver Ridge, Orchard Springs, Roy Jr. These are the final costs, including architect, FF&E, engineering, testing, all kinds of things going to here. I've got a chart that superintendent I review regularly, and it helps us know what the total cost of a building is. The total cost was $111 million for these facilities. The funding came from bond issues, almost $7 million from bond premiums, sale of properties, $2 million, and then this capital fund balances, this is spread over 4 years. So a little over $1 million, $1,250,000 of every year fund balance, we would plug the dike, so to speak. And that's how we paid for that. Going forward, the premium is not going to be there. And so there is in a small way, but it's capped. And so we have to be careful on how we estimate the bond cost for the coming years, for the coming up possible election. Capital challenges, I won't read through this, but know that we had a truth in taxation in 2016 that raised the capital outlay. Once again, our capital funding is low compared to some districts, and primarily we don't get much state money, and so that's a concern to us, and we're working on that. Let's go to the next page. Child nutrition programs. You can see the revenue. First off, let's just drop down to the balance. The fund balance in 18 was 2.5 million. The next year it went up to 3,063,000. And then last year it dropped by almost 1,579,000 to a fund balance of 1,484,000. Why did it drop so much? The reason why it dropped so much is because COVID. It was not a good year for child nutrition. We were not collecting paid lunches, and yet the kids, because kids weren't there for 3 months, and so that really hurt child nutrition. The ship has been righted, and mainly because of federal revenue increases. In this year, every lunch is considered a free lunch, and we get a lot of federal dollars. So you can see, look how big that federal jump went from 6.2 million to 11 million on what we estimate we're going to get federal dollars. We're estimating the state liquor tax to be about the same. That's an estimate. And lunch sales plummeted from 3,355,000 to 428,000. That's really from 4.1 million, because remember last year was a partial year, and the 428,000 is basically our a la carte menu. And so, and the 13,740,000 expenses, compensation, food, other indirect costs. We're estimating a balance of 548,000. So to increase that fund balance to a little over 2 million. We think the ship is righted. Just so you know, in fiscal year 22, the federal government is going to treat every lunch as a free reimbursement. So this meal price recommendation that's up there next, I just put it up there for just approval in case someone does pay, because you have to approve the price of meals. That's one of your tasks. It's at the end of this budget. But we've kept it the same, and it's now been the same for a number of years because of the free price. It's kind of irrelevant on with the federal government helping us there. Okay, Weber District enrollment. This has been really interesting to me. You can see the growth. We had 512 growth that year in the year 18. Year 19, we had 214. A charter school came in, and then 417 in year 20. Then our enrollment dropped by 391, or a 1.2% decrease. The reason it dropped this last October is because parents chose not to send their kids to school. And we are taking the state's estimate of 238 growth over this right here, 0.74. That's what our budget's based upon. We believe, though, that it's going to be greater than 238 as we rebound out of this pandemic. The charters were hit harder than in our area than Weber District. These are the charter enrollments that are housed in the Weber District boundary. Okay, they went from a growth of 330, a growth of 384, a negative of 159, and a negative of 141. They had an 11.4% drop in enrollment. New Ames, who we kind of keep an eye on, they're not necessarily in Weber School District, but they are a prominent charter in our area. They're housed in the Ogden District area, but 763, 887, 1042, 1136. I suspect as word gets out on our awesome offerings and programs that we have at Weber Innovations, that the New Ames growth is going to flatten, because we are really doing a lot of great things down at Weber Innovations. Okay, statewide enrollment COVID impact. Districts with strong online programs, and there were basically 3 of them: Tooele, Wasatch, and Washington. Washington has had a online school for quite a while now, and they call it Utah Online. And so it makes believe it's a statewide program. No, it's housed and operated by Washington, but people can live anywhere. But they had a growth rate from 1920 to 2021 of 4,487 students in 3 districts got that amount of growth, or 5.96%. Districts without strong online programs, which includes us, had a negative 1.34. They lost 6,906 students. So a bunch of these students were going to the online only program, online offerings, or staying home. You can see that our drop of 1.2% was typical of many school districts, but still below the state average drop. The state average drop was 1.34. Now, charters were also hit by online issues. There's 3 online only charters. My daughter works at one. They had a 51% growth. They had 1,900 student increase. And the regular charters that with no online presence had a 1,492 decrease, a 2.02% decrease. So the charters dropped more than did the districts that don't have an online presence.
Robert, just to remind the board, we started our Weber K-12 online program November 2nd. And we believe we're going to be able to capture.
Yep.
As that program builds.
So
Under Jennifer Boyer Thurgood's leadership and Nick Harris, we're gonna capture a lot of that.
That's absolutely correct. And then I was just going to add Weber School District response to development of strong online programs. It's imperative that we have a strong online program. Every district along the Wasatch Front is doing what we're doing, and we think we are doing it the best. We, like Jeff said, we've got great people, and we think that we can stop the bleeding, so to speak. There's basically three reasons to have a good online program. One is to provide options to parents. The other is to keep our kids from going elsewhere. And then also the other is to attract new kids that might, like homeschoolers or others that might want to give the public school system a try in an online setting. We think our online programs will help increase our enrollment, which then increases funding. Now here's one that, and I haven't showed this to Cammie or Gina, but it's very interesting to me. The last normal year we had was 18-19. 19-20 was not. 2018 to 2019. We were alive in 18-19 with John. Yes, fiscal year 18 to 2018 and 2019 was the last normal year we had. The fiscal year 20 year was not normal. Typically what happens is the October 1st is the high water mark. And I took this off of my student, so it doesn't align right with our official October enrollment. So you can't compare them. K is at full weight. There's no self-contained, various differences here before Chuck sends the numbers in. But our high water mark was in elementary was right here. And on the last Friday of school, we had grown over that period of time by 92 students. In secondary, they tend to slide. They hit a high in October 1, and it declines from the rest of the year. And the reason why it declines, you have early graduations, dropouts, things like that. And the junior high declined 94 from October 1 to the end of the year. The high school is by 231 for a 233 decline in ADM. And this is a normal pattern. So what happened in this year, the first year after fiscal year 20? For the first time ever, we've seen a reverse in this normal pattern. We have increased 321 students since October 1. And that's bodes really well for our growth on this coming up October. We believe that this 238 figure up here given to us by the state is low because we've already picked up 321 kids. And some of those kids are in migration. Their parents built a house and they moved here. And some are kids that decided at the semester, yeah, I'm coming back. You know, we're tired of being at home. We're coming back to the district. I don't know, and this putting them on the spot, but is this trend bearing out, Gina and Cammie? Have you seen the kids coming back over the year? Unlike other years, isn't that true? Okay. Lastly, tax rates. We've been talking about this big increase, and it was in fiscal year 7, which is clear over to the left of my chart, and it's not on the chart actually. We had a 23% increase. That's the highest, and then the market crashed. In fiscal year 17, we had 8.8, 9.9, 16, 9.5, 10.7, and then an 18.7. That's the second highest since 2001, since I've been here. This is the third highest right here. This is a very robust growth pattern. You can see 8.6 billion was our value, and now it's at 15, almost 0.9 billion. That's an amazing growth. And because of this growth, we expect to generate additional revenue that we weren't counting on. here are the new rates. The basic levy, we do not have yet. There's a big asterisk. The state hasn't released it. But we have a charter levy. This is what's raised for the charters. We also have the debt service. We're keeping the same. As you can see, the debt service has been the same. Board local levy, it goes down because the values went up. The voted leeway went down because values go up. Capital levy went down because values go up. And so of these three levies, they went down by almost 12%. And this addresses the rising value and lowering rate issue that Jeff talked about earlier this evening.
Yeah, I'd just like the board to take note of that because that's so important. Those are the three rates that this board really has control of, and the proposal is that those rates would come down nearly 12%.
Yeah. And
okay. So if you have an angry constituent come at you, you say, look, we don't have anything to do with values. What we have to do with is rates, and we've dropped our rates this year approximately 12%.
That's correct. And the other thing too is this is that rising value and lowering rate is in the aggregate. It might be for individual homes, it might buck the trend, but in the aggregate countywide, that's and so the good answer that superintendent says is we don't have control over value. Okay, so you see the total rate change, which includes our steady debt service and a basic levy that hasn't gone down yet because they're going to release it and that will go down. That's 1628. Right now we're down 5.71, which is the biggest drop in a rate since in the last 5-6 years. That's all I have. Basically it's been a good year, and I know that we've been working hard in finance to try and stay ahead of things. A lot of what we've done is keeping track of COVID dollars. There are varying pots of money, and we're getting more. And so that'll be a challenge in the next a positive challenge in the next couple of years of how best to spend those dollars. But the work that we've done is just incidental and supportive compared to the work what's happened out in schools. And I'm not saying that to say that we're not doing anything, but I know out in schools is where it's at. The business department just exists to support schools. With that said, President Ritchie, we need two motions. First, you got to see if there's any public comment because it is a hearing, and then afterwards we have two motions to approve.
I just had one quick question, again, Robert, on that.
Yeah.
The bond premium of almost $7 million, that's been significant, especially if we go out for another bond of 200 and something million. That's a big loss. That still happens out in the real world. Right. Where does that go on?
That goes to the, Jeff, you might could answer that.
Doug, that was one of the most frustrating things I've experienced with the legislature. They passed a law, I believe it was 2 years ago, that put a cap of 2% on what a municipality, a school district could receive on a bond proceed. And the frustration I had with that is this is just the free market at play.
Yeah, it's still there. So where does it go? Does the state get it?
No, the bidder doesn't offer it.
Oh,
and so
okay.
often the bidder will look at this and see this sort of artificial restriction being placed on the bond sale, and it scares them away.
Gotcha.
So, we've seen evidence that with this restriction, with this cap, we sometimes have fewer bidders. And so it's a concern. It wasn't in effect for any of the bond sales that were prior to fiscal year 2019.
Yeah.
So because our bond passed in 2017, all of those bond sales could profit from the premium that was offered. But now that's
the real market.
That's the real market. And that was the argument to
Was that Howard,
legislators.
was that Howard Stevenson?
I want to make another comment on that too. In the years we've been doing this over the last 20 years, the bond premium really didn't become a thing until the rates got
The
super low.
rates, yeah. It's a market phenomenon.
It's a market phenomenon. Back
Yeah.
in the 2006 bond election of 2012, rates weren't an issue because or bond premiums weren't an issue because the interest rates were higher.
Yeah.
And when they came down into below threes, the bidders started competing with that premium.
Yeah.
And so we've never really counted on the premium, you know, because you don't know if you're going to get it.
But it would sure help.
But it sure helps. And we are in a premium. We're in a premium market. Yeah,
that
it
helped
helps
us
a
to
lot.
finish the projects we had going.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
But
Thank you.
The two motions you'll need.
I think we're good to go. Walk me through it because I think we just got that done.
Yeah, you need.
So here we go. I'm gonna
You need
public
to,
comment.
Public comment.
Mr. Hells, no. Seeing none, I make a motion to close the public comment.
Yep.
See that by Paul, second by, thank you, Jan. All in favor? Aye. Aye. Motion carries. So now we're gonna move on to the action item.
Mhm.
And I'd entertain a motion to accept the initial approval of the working 2021-2022 budget.
Right.
Doug, moved by Doug, second by Paul. Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Motion carries. All right, thank you. Well, we gotta do it again, sorry.
This second motion is for the final budget of fiscal year 21.
So now the next motion will be the approval of 2020 to 2021 budget, right?
The final approval.
Final approval for the budget on 2021.
So moved.
That ends in 3 weeks.
That ends in 3 weeks.
So moved.
So moved by Jan, thank you. Second by Dean, all in favor?
Aye.
I was a little worried on that one. That one passed as well.
Very good. Very good.
And board, we gotta go through it one more time. Approval of real estate property by Dr. Robert Peterson. Go ahead, sir.
So what this is to keep our balances stable so that we have reserves. We're proposing entering into a real property lease. One of the challenges we've had is that we went out and acquired the services of an architect for the high school, and many of you are on that committee. That we traveled around six different schools, and a common theme amongst these other districts is that you get your architect on board before a bond election. That helps people see what it is you're proposing, and we acquired the services of MHTN. They've done a lot of work for us. They've done, by June 30th, they will have done $2 million worth of work, and this is not money that's going to go to waste. If we decide not to have a bond election, or if the bond doesn't pass, it's still money that we would have spent anyway. It'll just hang there until we come at the voters again, because the work's been done. And so to help provide stability to our fund balances, we felt it would be prudent with these low interest rates to do a real property lease that will cost about $280,000 a year over an 8-year period. And when the bond passes, we can pay off. You can use bond proceeds to pay off that lease, which is basically helping pay with the architect. So it's kind of a mechanism to help us straddle. And I'm glad we did this, because that 18.7% increase in value is really indicative of how hot this market is. It just really is. And if we hadn't been on board early, we would have been in jeopardy of being delayed and costing millions of dollars to the taxpayers. But should the bond pass, we are poised and ready to start because of the work that's been done on this high school already. And so we've done real property leases in the past, and the way we propose to pay for it is because of that 18.7% increase, we have new revenue and capital outlay of over $700,000, and we're going to take a portion of that and pay the lease for this year. Hopefully the bond will pass. And then we have, if the bond doesn't pass, we have not only that new revenue built in, but we also have other leases coming off this year. And so it's just kind of a placeholder. It helps give us financial stability.
So we recommend that you approve this real property lease, and to give us stability in the capital fund.
Thank you, Robert, and thank you to your team that got creative to come up with this so that we are ready to go if and when we choose to pull that. Board, I'd entertain a motion to approve the real property lease agreement. Paul, Dean, second. All in favor, or any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye, motion carries. Thank you, Robert. Board, we've come to the end of our agenda, unfortunately. It's 9 o'clock. I'd entertain a motion to adjourn.
Is this what a city council meeting feels like?
No, I've
So
never been to
moved.
one of them.
Yes.
So moved by Jan,
It
who is a
is.
city council member. Second by Dean. All in favor? Aye. Motion carries. Be safe. Thank you. Job well done, everybody.